I've been working in the internship now for maybe since about, it was right when COVID started, so about March.
Okay.
And so it got really rough there for a while, but
Yeah. Who is your supervisor?
Tammy Miller.
Okay, I'm not familiar with her.
So
Okay.
that's kind of my story right now. And so we actually, like I said, we have a lot of exciting things going on right now because of the time that we've had an internship to kind of invest in things. And so we're kind of doing some brain trainings and counseling right now, and kind of using technology in counseling, which is huge. It's so big. In my undergraduate, I spent a lot of time writing about that technology and counseling and biofeedback and things. And so,
Okay, well,
so
I'll tell you a little bit about me then.
please, yeah, please, absolutely.
I'm a Wyoming kid. I came over to UW, traditional age student. I floated around between several majors before being undeclared, and then I went to career counseling in this very building where I now work, and took the strong interest inventory. And the number one career that came up on that was journalism. And so based on that, I decided to major in journalism. I never sat down with a career counselor to discuss those results. I just got them back and saw number one journalism and went, great, journalism. So I got my degree in journalism. I liked it as an undergrad, but when I worked in the field, I hated it. And I was very, very unhappy. And so I went to career counseling again, and this time I actually met with the career counselor for 6-7 sessions, and I finally one day looked at him and I said, I want to do what you do. How do I do this? And so he pointed me to the counselor education program here at the University of Wyoming. And so I came back and got my master's. And back at that time, the program had a college student affairs track. And so that was the track I went into and got my degree in. And then I worked for 15 years at LCCC in Cheyenne.
Oh my goodness.
And did academic advising, career counseling, and personal counseling, mental health counseling. And then came over to UW, and I've been here for 2 years.
Wow. How do you like it there?
I love it. I love working in higher education and with college students. It's just the best job in the world. I don't even know what else I'd want to do.
Yeah. Wow. That is so spectacular. Wow. I guess so. That is so amazing. That is really amazing. Yeah. So I spent some time at UW myself, and anyways, I really wanted to get into the counseling program at UW, but I couldn't get in. So anyway, so maybe a PhD comes around and I'll try again. But anyway, so yeah, it's a really competitive program because one, it's the only one in the state, but two, that it's a really competitive program nationwide. I mean, it's a good program. And so I looked at the one in Casper that they have in Casper, the counseling program through Casper. So, wow, that's so interesting. So this is kind of really new to me. The career counseling is a really new subject to me. And so I haven't been in the class very long, maybe 3 weeks. And so I guess, the project that we're doing right now is I'm writing a paper about, it would be you. I mean, I'm going to write a paper about you. And so what the project is going to be about is kind of your background. And so we've kind of, we've kind of looked at some of your background, your history, but then also like I guess I would call it a theoretical orientation, right? And so how you take an individual in and the theories that you use to kind of guide them or help them navigate to their career. And then lastly, kind of the approaches that you take with clients that would recognize with minority populations, and so such as like special needs and things like that. And so that is my goal right now, is to kind of check into those areas. So I actually have a few questions that I have are maybe does that sound like something you want to do?
Sure.
Awesome. Wow, great. Thank you so much. So could you maybe talk just a little bit about your counseling philosophy? I mean, so a theoretical orientation, as we call it, clinical mental health, is kind of, I'm sure we use some of the same tools, like Gestalt and person-centered and things like that. And so I guess, could you maybe talk a little bit about that, about your philosophy, your counseling philosophy?
Okay, I think mine is evolving. For a long time, I have really kind of approached things with the person-environment fit. I don't know, have you gotten into theories yet in your class for career counseling theories?
Yes, a little bit, yes. And so I guess one thing that stuck out to me was like Krumbold's theory, and so I've written a lot about that already. And so, and being it so that theory seems to be like a really strong connection between like mental health counseling and career counseling, because the way that like Krumbold's theory is presenting, the way that the tool that it provides us is to be able to work with the client on that line, that their mental health and their background and their history are all important elements to where they go with their career, and that also that their experiences are valued. Like all of everyone, your whole experience is a value that you have, and that it's, I mean, you can spend it about how you pursue your career. And so I've spent a lot of time on Krumbold's theory so far.
Yeah. Have you talked about the Holland person-environment fit?
Yes, yeah, and value-based, yes. Trait and factor.
Kind of been where I started and where I initially resonated, because I think that's really what worked for me and what helped me. But I think a combination of, as I get older and see things differently myself, I also have sort of evolved in that theoretical orientation. I still like person-environment fit, but I am starting to see more value in Bandura's social learning theory. You know, and you made reference to how do we approach like either minority students or students with special needs, that kind of thing. And I think this really fits with that, in the sense that their career choice is really influenced by their experience of the world and what they understand about themselves, both good and bad.
Absolutely, right.
And so how do you either help a student or a client make sense of that and use that information to explore careers, or how do you help them see, that they can move beyond that does not have to define them if they don't want it?
Absolutely, right. Yeah, that's an amazing theory. So you said that your theory is evolving, and so, I mean, what does that mean? I mean, as far as, so you're kind of you're still integrating theories, and you're still finding what works and what doesn't work. Is that maybe kind of what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think like when I was working at the community college level, that was different too. The kinds of students that you meet with typically at a community college, I have noticed since being at UW, it's very, very different.
Wow.
I almost approached every student at the community college first through Maslow. I would frequently, or regularly, maybe not frequently, but regularly work with students who did not have some of their Maslow's hierarchy needs addressed. And it's very hard for someone in that space, even though they're coming in and saying, I don't know what to major in, if they have an unstable housing environment or are unemployed and don't know how they're going to pay their bills. Like, that makes it very hard for us to sit there and talk about some of those higher up things. So that was a whole other approach. But at the university, it's you come across that very infrequently. So for the most part here, I've worked more through kind of starting with the social learning theory, kind of assessing where they are with that, and then if person environment seems to fit, we go that route. But you mentioned Crumbolt's, the happenstance theory is also something I really am enjoying and finding a lot more value in too. Because that certainly happened with me. I never in a million years would have thought this is what I would end up doing.
That's such a magnificent thing to say, because I think everyone can recognize that is definitely a factor. And I guess what I was kind of putting together last night is that those factors, it also like allows someone to see their emotional connections to their past and be able to use those. And then I guess Crumbolt himself had said that just using that happenstance connection in the future allows someone to have a more positive outlook about their career because they're so bonded to that direction, and on an emotional and a spiritual level. I think that was really interesting to hear from Crumbolt, that that's kind of what he was writing. That was in like 2005, I think, that he wrote that. So you said that, I know you made a reference to the social learning theory several times, and I'm definitely familiar with that in Bandura, and I guess I'm still kind of not clear about what that could mean in your office. I mean, how do you use the social learning theory? And like you said about how an individual could be on a certain level of development about social learning, how does that kind of unfold? What does that mean?
Let me see if I can share my screen with you real quick. So I've got a slide pulled up that. Sorry. Okay, there we go. All right. Do you see my slide on social learning theory?
Yes, I see it.
Okay, so I did this presentation to a class last semester where I kind of talked about some of the major career counseling theories. And so I guess the reason why this one, again, is so powerful to me is some of this, like that first thing, self-efficacy. What does a person believe they can achieve? If you're talking about an African-American male from Houston who came here to play sports and came from a lower socioeconomic status family, his understanding of what he is capable of doing perhaps is going to be very different from an upper income family kid from Chicago or even Boulder. Maybe Boulder is a better example. Those two kids are going to come into this college environment with two very different understandings of what they're capable of and what they're meant to be able to do. And so I love kind of hearing from a student what their own self-perception is along those lines. I always ask students what their parents do for a living, and then talk to them about what kinds of messages do they think they got from their parents about what work is. Is work something you just tolerate because it gives you a paycheck and you do anything you can to get out of work? Or is work something that is an inherently fulfilling part of your identity? Those messages that they get from their parents about what work is really influences what the student comes to us with those expectations.
Absolutely. So do you think that, say we're still having those two different individuals that are coming to see you, and so do you maybe think that the way that they see themselves differently is still developing, and so when they come to the university, even though they have different experiences, that right now they're kind of maybe sensitive or vulnerable to the experiences they have to kind of help themselves determine which direction they'll go? Do you think that at the college age, students or people are still sensitive to, social learning about where they go with their career?
Yeah, and I think that's part of why I've always loved working with this age group. Why I always wanted to work with young adults, because it's such a wonderful, amazing, transformative time. in our lives, and college is such a big part of that. And so being able to help a young adult see, that you can now choose what your path is. It's up to you, with all the heavy responsibility and also joy that choice can bring to you.
Wow.
And helping them kind of see that, and when that light kind of goes off for them, it's just so amazing.
Yeah. Do you think that maybe some people are really sensitive to your input? I mean, that some individuals maybe hypersensitive to your input. Is that something they may be worried about?
Yes, I am sure that is true.
Yeah. Wow. That's really extraordinary. I see that too, definitely. That, I mean, especially with the younger that a person is, the more that social learning theory is true. Like, I mean, I could sit in a session with an 11-year-old or a 10-year-old and introduce them to a word, and chances are by the end of that session they have used that word. I think that's just so magnificent. It's so incredible. So, thank you for that. That was such a huge thing. Now, I'm so glad that you're prepared to introduce me to social learning through a career development perspective. That was so amazing. I was so kind of, it was just so vague about how Bandura was relevant, because I have heard him mentioned in the books. In career development, I was kind of just I didn't realize how that connected, but that makes a lot of sense. So maybe if you could, we also need to kind of give a report about maybe your day-to-day activities. And so could you maybe walk me through, like, if I was a student, that maybe kind of what we would go through in the hour that we were together?
So when a student calls our main office and says, usually what they will say is one of two things. Either I was majoring in this, but now I know that's not what I want to do, but I'm not sure what I want to do. Is there someone I can talk to? Yes. Schedule an appointment. Or I've heard that you have those tests that tell me what I will be good at. I want to take those tests. That's what I did. But back when I was an undeclared student, I called and said, I want to take those tests that I've heard about. So from there, they get scheduled to meet with a career counselor, and we have 3 career counselors on our staff, and then we usually have 1 intern. So we'll schedule a person with one of those folks, and then in our intake session, we do kind of cover general mental health background or concerns. We always want to know if a person is currently in therapy with anyone, if they have a history or background of trauma, if they're currently having suicidal thoughts or have dealt with suicidal thoughts in the past. We always kind of cover that stuff first. And then, of course, we do the usual informed consent. But from there, we start asking questions. We just want to get to know the person and kind of, like I said, I always ask, what do your parents do? What kinds of messages did they give to you about work and what work is about, what the value of work is? What are the important decisions that you've made in your life so far? What influence those decisions? What kinds of things do you like to do in your free time? Just all kinds of questions. We just really want to get to know the person. And then we also, of course, ask, what is your goal? Like, what is it you want to get out of this, the time we spend together? And usually, and I'm sure you've seen this in counseling as well, their goal, what they say their goal is, and what it ends up being usually changes. Like, their concept of what their goal is might be one thing, and then as you work together, it becomes something else. But that's a good place to start, of course, is what brings you here? What is it you want to get out of this? From there, we do have the interest inventories that we have that we can give them. We don't always give those to people. It may not necessarily get at what their goal is, but usually, especially with the younger students, it's helpful to to help them not only kind of get to know themselves a little better. Usually they don't know themselves as well as they think they do. But also it gives us a common language so that as we start talking about things, it gives us that common language to talk about things through. And I'll stop for a minute in case you have any questions.
Absolutely. No, not really. So I guess one question I do have is that, so you said that not everyone you recommend an interest inventory to. Now, is that something that's is that kind of a serious thing? Is that done for a serious reason? Or is it, I mean, do you feel that some people are not prepared to take one of those tests?
I think generally it just, and this is one thing I really try to preach to people about career counseling, and the reason why I tell my story is because the first time I went, that's what I missed. I just got the results of the inventory back, and I took them and I went and did my own thing. I never sat down and talked to anybody about what does this mean for me.
Wow.
Why did journalism come up number one? You know, now I can look back and see why that came up as number one, and there were a lot of things about that field that I liked, but I never talked it through with anyone. That's where the magic happens.
Yeah.
It's sitting down with someone with those inventories and talking about it. You know, anyone can go to BuzzFeed and take a quiz and get those results and walk away and make some sort of decision, but it's the talking to a trained person that gives you the information. And so frequently, you know, if you are skilled at it and if a person knows themselves, you know, I'm talking like maybe a 20, 21-year-old student or even older, usually they know themselves well enough that the inventories are not necessary. And that's usually not their question anyway. Usually they know kind of what they want to do and why. There usually is just some other sort of obstacle that we have to work through.
So what happens if you have an obstacle? I mean, what would be an example of an obstacle, and then how would you kind of sit with someone and help work them through that?
Let me think of an example. One of our summer intern had a great example of someone she was working with that I said, oh, this is a great case study of why career counseling. Let me think for a minute. The student was a high-achieving student, came from a family of 3 children. Her 2 siblings had significant health challenges, but the student herself was healthy. And so her parents had always looked to her to be the trouble-free child. You know, speaking of expectations that are placed on you. So their expectation of her was that she was high-achieving and that she chose a career field that would continue that high-achieving pathway and that she was successful in that and did not make any trouble for her parents, so that their focus could be on the other 2 siblings who had health problems. So now that she's in college and she's doing this pre-med pathway and realizing she really doesn't like that, she wants to do, I can't remember what she wanted to do, but she had this thing that she wanted to do. So it was working through, how do you make that decision for yourself, that what my parents want for me is not what I want for me. And so how do you make that choice confidently and then also have that conversation with your parents saying, I am not going to be that person that you wanted me to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, I think we read about that in career counseling, and I guess one thing that I had read about it is that a lot of people can't separate that so my parents expect this of me, and they can't really separate that that's something that they can separate themselves and they can be apart from. But then also they say, like, one sensitive aspect that you have as a career counselor is that you have to face that that's one element of a person's life that you can kind of interrupt, that, oh, you don't have to do what your parents want you to do. And I mean, depending on who the client is or how maybe young they are, that could be like a disruption of their normal functioning. Like, you can't really tell someone that they don't have to do, or they aren't going to do or they're going to go a certain direction because against what their parents wish. And so that I've had seen that that's kind of a dilemma that you face.
Yes. And especially with, we work with international students for whom that's more of a cultural, I think in America, of course, it's very accepted generally that you can do whatever you want and blaze your own path and be your own person. But if you're someone from a more collectivist culture, it's having that cultural sensitivity to not say to a student, well, you don't have to do what your parents want you to do, because they actually do,
Yeah, right.
So that makes it a little bit different too.
So while we're right there, I guess I had two questions while we're right there. One is like the global economy. Now, that's something that's mentioned in the coursework about the global economy. And so could you maybe what does the global economy mean to you? And is it really relevant to, even working in Laramie, is that a relevant aspect of the career counseling that you go through?
Yes. Have you ever read or heard of the book The Earth is Flat?
No.
It's written by an economist, Thomas Friedman. And so when I read that book, I think it's probably 15 years old now, that was another huge influence on probably the way I view career counseling, because it talked about how the reason why he says the earth is flat is that, it used to be here in Wyoming, you train primarily Wyoming kids to get jobs in this state or region. And we were only competing against other people from this state or region. But nowadays you're competing with people from all around the world. And you can also compete for jobs all around the world from Wyoming.
Yeah.
And so in some ways that's very exciting and wonderful. You can start here and go anywhere. But it's also, it's a much more competitive workplace now. You have to kind of make sure students are choosing career pathways that will help them be competitive in the ways they want to be competitive against people from all over the world.
Yeah, that's such an amazing connection to flip those two, to say that they're both relevant, that local is relevant, but it's global, and the globe is relevant, and it's kind of something that you're going to face. That's really a huge connection. That's just a huge connection in itself to kind of face that. So a little bit and the other question that I had was maybe just about like students with special needs and diverse populations. What does diversity mean to you? A diverse population, what does that mean to you? And then how is your approach any different with someone that would recognize as being diverse, or as it within a diverse population?
Yeah, we have a advisor training program on our campus, and of course, the bulk of my role is actually spent doing academic advising, and that's something we've really focused on this summer in light of some of the, national events we've been seeing. Excuse me, is trying to kind of focus on and be sensitive to multicultural backgrounds among students. Sort of how do we, and you attended UW, so we are predominantly a white institution, both in terms of our faculty and staff and students, overwhelmingly white. So how do we, as people coming from those backgrounds, kind of enhance our awareness of that as we come into our job, but also see the student and try to find out about kind of what they're coming in with.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think one thing I've learned over my 20 years in higher ed is don't make any assumptions. I've been wrong so many times. Like pleasantly wrong.
What would be an example of that?
I worked with an athlete a few weeks ago, and I'll give you two examples. So I worked with an athlete a few weeks ago, and he's one of those, a young black man coming to us from an urban area. And I pulled up his information in my account, and there's a student photo that we can see. And I know it's kind of typical among athletes in general. When they take their team photos, they always look, they have to kind of look badass, I guess. I don't know.
Yes.
And so his picture kind of looked like that. He looked kind of surly or whatever. And so I was kind of like, oh boy, he's going to be tough to work with. And we got on our Zoom call, and he was just the most pleasant, kind, just lovely, sunny personality guy. And so I was again like, Chrissy, stop doing that,
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so big. That's like one of those things that only doing these interviews is someone ever going to learn that kind of stuff before it's too late. That's so valuable to me. I've learned a lot from counselors just by accidentally asking, just by barely getting somewhere. And then you find, oh, I learned this humongous lesson that would benefit all counselors. Here it is. That's so valuable. I think, yeah, that's such a huge thing I'm going to now take from you, because that's so huge to know that bias is there, and even though we can't recognize it, it registers. That's so huge.
So yeah, I've definitely learned, always try to take each person for who they are and let them tell you who they are before you make any assumptions. And it's a constant, again, this just happened, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago? It's a constant reminder from the universe.
Yes, absolutely. So, maybe my last question would kind of be, so we're talking about like your day-to-day practice, and so we talked a lot about your orientation and your approaches, and even though you say that your approach is evolving and that your theoretical orientation, it differs with the individuals that you work with, I wonder what maybe one major frustration that you have when working with someone, or maybe even maybe a common frustration, or maybe just one frustration that you've faced when working with the student population.
The first thing that popped into my mind when you said that was we are constantly battling the messages that students get from society and from their parents that they have to pick just the right major that will lead to the career they're going to do for the rest of their lives. It just persists, and I don't know why.
Yeah.
So aggravating, because that's not true.
Yeah, well, I guess what I would think that it would be the economy. That's maybe a function of the economy. Like, I have to go this way, and I can't fail, and I have to be. Every decision matters, and to me that seems like an economic pressure that there's no room to fail, and I think that maybe that's going back to that.
And this generation was so. I don't know what age you are, but this generation was really influenced by the economic recession of the late 2000s. And you really see that a lot in students when you talk about their parents' work experiences. A lot of them will refer to, yes, some parent lost their job back in that time, and it was a really big struggle for their family, and so I need to now pick a major so that will never happen to me.
Yeah.
And so trying to honor that experience while also combating the belief that it will never happen to them,
Yeah.
Trying to weave all that together is hard. It's fun. That's part of the fun of the work. But trying to combat that mindset when students come to college that I have to just pick this perfect major for me, and it has to be very practical, and I have to make lots of money, and it has to be very secure. And so kind of trying to unlearn that for them, that there are very few jobs that are going to fit that.
Yeah, that's a really hard place to be. I think that's kind of one of the major obstacles that I think maybe everyone faces, is that money and persistence and the need for the world to need you, I think, is a big worry. So
even my own daughter, she's a freshman this year.
Oh, wow. No.
Had a family member of ours tell her, when you go to college, don't pick one of those, bullshit majors like women's studies. Pick something that's practical, that's going to, and I just looked at my daughter and I was like,
Yeah.
I've always told her, it doesn't matter what you pick. Pick something that's going to make you happy.
Yeah.
Just pick what makes you happy, what you're going to get up out of bed for every day and go to class. That's what I want you to do.
Is that something you kind of implement with your students too? Is that kind of that major theme that you have to be happy?
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. That's also a really important element. So maybe one thing that rewards you, maybe a big reward that you find how is your career rewarding?
In every single way. I love working with, like I said before, young adults. They're just endlessly fascinating. They bring me so much hope and joy for the world. People who harp on, kids today, I don't see that at all. I think they're all just amazing. People I work with are amazing. Everybody kind of has that similar passion for students and for education. I think working with college students has always kept me young. So I appreciate that too.
Absolutely. Now, I guess, so that's that's so huge. This is definitely enough to write a report about you. I'll definitely send you the report. That's kind of been my favorite part about graduate school is doing all these interviews and working with people and then sending them the work that came from it. I think that's really, a prolific part about graduate school. Besides the fact that you can almost see a career path in graduate school, you can almost see that there's a job there somewhere. So, is there anything that you want to ask me, or anything else that you maybe want to say about yourself or your career, or even career counseling in general?
When I spoke to the practicum class in the counseling program back in the spring to kind of pitch our site as an internship site. And one thing I talked to them about, in between working for LCCC and coming to UW, I spent 2 years doing private practice clinical mental health counseling. And one thing I really realized between that time is that I feel like career counseling, you almost have to use your counseling skills more.
Wow.
Sometimes I think people see career counseling as light counseling.
Yeah.
Because you aren't typically dealing with things like, bipolar issues or, those influence it sometimes, but you're not treating it, right? But because a person comes into career counseling not understanding that it is still counseling and why all those things are affecting their ability to make this decision, you really have to use your counseling skills. So it's almost a bigger challenge.
Wow. Yes, that's really big. A bigger challenge, absolutely. And I think that's one thing that I've learned so far is that kind of, you're right, that's the way I saw it too, is that career counseling, it's not deep psychological work, but then the more you get into it, it's like, you really could put that in there. That kind of is a huge factor. That's why I liked Krumboldt's theory again, is just because, it seems as though he had a good understanding of the emotional side, of the biological side of people that are going to be initiated into careers. And I think that's why I liked his theory so much, is that it was totally the biological mechanisms of an individual applying themselves and being able to, no matter what, the decisions you're making are always going to be on those levels of emotions and psychology. And I really liked that part about Krumboldt's.
If you think about it, especially in our culture, our work is so much a part of our identity. In fact, I think probably one of the, if we were to make our identity into a pie, I am a mom, I am a sister. Work is a big piece of that pie. We see ourselves through our work. And so, from a student's perspective as a 19, 20-year-old, making a choice about what that work and identity is going to be is obviously a huge decision. And then if you're working with an adult who, for whatever reason, can't do what they've done for 20 years and is re-careering and has lost that piece of their identity, you know, I mean, I've seen both ends of that spectrum, and just that identity piece is such a huge part of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I guess that makes me kind of wonder. I mean, do you have any like outcomes or numbers or statistics about the kind of success rate that that you have with your students? No. Yeah.
I think that's one of the harder parts of counseling, period, not just career counseling, is sometimes we don't see the results of our work. You know, I have told some of my interns, it's like you plant seeds and then you walk away and you never get to see the garden that grows.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes a student, like the other day, one of the other counselors heard back from a student that she worked with 2 years ago who said, thank you, you know, the work we did together really helped me, and I'm in this major now and I love it. You know, but you don't often get to have that.
Yeah. Is that hard, do you think?
Yeah, oh yeah. Sometimes, you know, they walk out the door and you never know if you're going to see them again. And you don't know, you know, if something you said is going to flower next week or in 10 years.
Wow, yes, I like that. That's definitely going to be in the paper, definitely, about the flowers. The flower metaphor is a really big analogy. Awesome, yes. So do you maybe have any questions for me or anything, about anything, about school or work or anything?
I don't know, I guess, what are you enjoying right now with, like, your internship? What are the things you're working on that you like?
Huge question. Love it. So right now I'm trying to get myself more into the mode and more into the work of like the clinical side about psychological assessments and like the counseling work with clients, because right now I spent a lot of time trying to like build a program for the clinic for brain training and things like that. And so it's a really huge element, and the clinic has bought a bunch of technology and we're kind of implementing this technology, and we're working with different programs for technology and counseling and doing biofeedback and neurofeedback. And so I've spent a lot of time doing that. And so my goal now is to kind of get into the other side of that and be familiar with psychological assessments and diagnosis and diagnostics and that clinical side. And so that's my major goal. And also it is to kind of build a clientele with the brain training, because right now we're kind of seeing meditation as kind of a really up and coming like hit in counseling. And so we're working with that right now. And so those are the kind of things that I'm working with and that we're kind of building in the clinic. And it's been so, like I said, when I was in school, this was like something that was so untouchable. Like these are things that you don't see often, that clinics don't implement often, that especially in Wyoming that you wouldn't be able to see. So right now there are about 145 mental health clinics in the United States that can work with autistic children through neurofeedback. And the clinic can actually do that right now. And so there's only about 145 clinics in the entire United States that do that. And so that's kind of the numbers that we're kind of working with right now. And so we're actually working with other programs that there's like one clinician that is a part of this program in the entire state. And then also like the neurofeedback part is from Colorado and the surrounding states, there maybe 100 neurofeedback clinics or clinics that can offer neurofeedback. And so we can do that right now. And so that is so huge for the state and the community. That's kind of like, I'm so like, I get up in the morning, I'm like really like, oh my God, we have to get this out there because people need this, you know? So that's kind of what I'm seeing in it. And so I'm just trying to balance that being excited and knowing really how important this could be for some people's treatments. And so that's kind of where I am in the internship now. And so I feel that I just want to kind of work with, pay my clinic for allowing me to do internship here, and then also kind of help them have a program so when I leave internship that there's something actually running because of the work that we did.
Yeah. That's amazing that you could do that as an intern.
Yeah, it really has been. Yeah, it's been really, really big and important. And so I guess I came this last time I came from Kearney, Nebraska. I lived in Kearney, Nebraska, and they have a neurofeedback clinic there. And it's just, I had talked with people that were introduced to neurofeedback, and it's really hard because when you have a child with like autism or ADHD, some people will be like prescribed or recommended to go the neurofeedback path, but they don't know what that is. Like a community member doesn't know what that is, and it's really like I learned of someone I was training with that her son had autism, and she said she was recommended neurofeedback. And I was like, oh my God, you need to get in there because not a lot of people can do that. And she was just like, oh my, I didn't realize it was such a big deal. And that's kind of where we are now is how do we break that down and simplify how big of a deal this is while actually running with it being a pretty significant clinical treatment.
Yeah. Ooh, that sounds like a big task.
So that's where we are now. And that's kind of my interest. And I hope to kind of stay on that path because there's more and more technology coming out and more research that's kind of proving that this is a good track to be on, to be able to offer people.
Yeah, I used to work with a counselor when I was at LCCC who was very big into biofeedback. So that's where I kind of learned a little bit about it.
Wow, who was that?
Kristen Erickson.
Really?
I think he's at Bellevue University now in Nebraska.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna look Mr. Erickson up and see. Yeah, that's really interesting. So anyway, we are doing that. Maybe I'll send you a link. We're actually tonight. I'm gonna do kind of like an orientation to the neurofeedback device, which we have right here. And so they sell these for really cheap. And so I'm gonna do an orientation online tonight with an 11-year-old kid that is about to start the brain training. And so we're kind of just gonna introduce him and a few other individuals about how to work that band. So I'll send you that link.
Cool, thank you.
And so I'll send you that report as soon as it's done.
Okay.
Absolutely.
If you think of anything else as you're writing this up, if you want clarification or another question comes up, just let me know.
Wow, awesome. That's so great. Awesome. Definitely. Thank you so much.
Okay, you think that answered enough for today, though?
No, I definitely could write a book about you, I think. Yeah. You might enjoy it, too, so.
Okay, well, Jacob, let me know if anything else comes up.
Yes.
Otherwise, I will just look forward to seeing that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ms. Renfro.
You are welcome. Have a great day.
Bye-bye now.